Baked Bros presents the Know Your Dose podcast. Join hosts Thomas Rimbach, Nadeem Alhassan, and Derek Espinosa as they turn the soil on the cannabis industry. With over 20 years of combined industry experience, these three experts will deliver your dose of cannabis, psychedelics, and personal development. Follow on their journey as they aim to destigmatize cannabis, combat the abuse of pharmaceuticals, and implement their altruistic approach into the budding cannabis industry.
All right.
Okay.
That sounds way better, huh?
Oh man, you sound like now we're laying on a couch together.
Ooh, I would cuddle you. So how's your I'm just gonna cut you off there. How's your week of isolation been?
um, Mine?
Yeah, yours.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I mean, it has been stressful to say the least. It's really interesting how much I know that I'm safe ultimately, but for some reason my brain thinks I'm like need thinks we're gonna go lockdown tomorrow. And even if we do, that's for some reason I have to defend myself as if there was going to be people trying to take my home. And it's weird
Yeah.
how much it is because I know I'm good. We all
Right.
do, but for some
Right.
reason there's this like slight addiction where your brain almost I don't it's almost as if it wants it to happen. Like it wants to experience this stress and this fear.
Well, I think it's go ahead.
Well, I just think from like an evolutionary perspective, and evolution would have selected for people to the people who cared enough to like really prepare and to worry and to stress out and make sure that all the ducks were in a row. Those are the people that would have survived, regardless of whether it was a virus, a saber-toothed tiger, an incoming warring tribe. So it's not that your brain wants it to happen; it's just preparing as if it's going to happen because all the information is pointing towards this shit is going to happen, and you don't want to die. That's my
Yeah,
take on it.
that's kind of where I was going to go with it. This may be the and correct me if I'm wrong, Derek, or this is not applicable here, but this may be a prime example of the brain default mode network, like from an evolutionary standpoint, meaning how ingrained our brain is in taking and cautious measures, right? Like we're acting out, guys. Like we're doing, not us, but like people in general are doing things that we otherwise would never do. Again, there was a video that someone had shared about someone going in and getting a Costco supply of toilet paper that has like 24 rolls, 400 sheets per roll, and it's like he did the math, 20 sheets per wipe. It would take, you would have to be taking 182 shits per day in order to go through all that toilet paper. So chill the fuck out.
It also helped me understand that I might use a little bit too much toilet paper. It was like, that's what you use? That's interesting.
And what's even
Totally.
more interesting when like I went to the grocery store just a couple days ago, and dude, it's fascinating how much veggies are still there. Like
Totally.
people don't know how to cook. People don't know how to fucking cook vegetables. They don't know how to use them. It's incredible, but everything regarded like SpaghettiOs and canned food and meat, especially,
Dude,
is
there's
just,
no pasta, no bread.
dude, it's crazy, man. And it takes me back to that episode we did with Stephanie Espinoza, the food scientist. And she was talking about the studies that were being taken in like the blue zones, and how they ate on average per month. What was it, 8 ounces of meat?
Yeah, something like that. Like a
Yeah, and
really,
it's
really
like
low number.
all the meat's gone. All the meat's gone, guys. But there's so much veggies
Meat and
available.
processed food. Dude, I saw a dude at the store with like 20 boxes of Totino's pizzas.
Dude,
Fuck, man.
I was at Costco and I saw a lady with like 8 bottles of fucking Crown Royal, and I was like, "Oh, okay."
Wow.
I'm like, I guess that's apocalypse food, I guess.
I got a video I haven't shown you guys yet, but at Costco, a dude had a full flatbed covered with all like with 3 stacks of it. Dude, 25 cases of Coors Light.
Oh my
Oh
god.
my
And nothing on there said survival whatsoever. Like there wasn't even a bowl, not even a loaf of bread. Like, dude. Oh man. But I think you're
That's
right,
awesome.
Demo. People don't know how to cook. and that's probably why I didn't buy many veggies. But what they're thinking about is them going bad. I think is some of that reason too. You know, you got canned foods; they can sit in there for a really long time. You know, veggies are only going to be as good as you can, like maybe a week, 2 weeks if you take care of them, and then some of them, if you freeze, go bad immediately. So I think that's
Yeah,
part of the reason as well. But
that
it still
definitely.
calls to, yeah.
That is very valid. I
Mhm.
just couldn't help get a chuckle out of it.
Well,
Yeah, well, look what you're cooking at home, right? I mean, you love it. That's how you're doing your isolation.
Oh
It's
yeah, dude.
cooking.
I've been baking. I made banana bread. I made peanut butter cookies, medicated cookies. I made pizza. I've been making all kinds of stuff. It's been great, honestly. Like if I was ever gonna do a cooking channel, which all my friends asked me to do, now would be the time. Um, but
Well,
guys, I'd
on
like.
top of all
Oh,
the
go ahead.
rest.
Go
I was
ahead.
just gonna say people are stocking up on cannabis.
Oh, yes, they are. Which let's lead into the cannabis because this is a cannabis podcast, and we have an interesting topic for the day, and we're going to be talking about cannabis in the lungs. I think this is going to be super fascinating, Derek, because you put out one of your doses of education. It's on the bakebros.com website under the Learn More. That's all written content from you, which is awesome. I encourage everybody to check those out if you want compelling and real science. Well, dude, let's get into the lungs a little bit and how they work, why the lungs are important, types of lung diseases, and things like that. Thomas, you're pretty well educated on it, and I know we were during our lunch we were talking about was it COPD? Is that what it
Right,
was that what
right.
it's right? And
Mhm.
what is COPD and how does it affect the lungs? Like what can we do to help it? Can you help it? I mean, what? How? What?
Fun fact is, no two lungs are the same size, by the way. So your right lung or your left lung is bigger than the other one. It's just kind of
Oh,
weird.
interesting.
Um, but what they're for is really a process of called gas exchange. It's the way that our body can eliminate CO2 as our waste product and bring in oxygen. Funny thing is when you feel like when you hold your breath and you feel like you need to breathe, that's not because your body's running out of oxygen. It's because your body needs to get the CO2 out. Um,
Mm,
your body can live for like 8 to 10 minutes on its oxygen levels. The problem with with having to breathe is you need to get that CO2 out.
mm,
So the airway really, the lungs consist of two lungs, bronchi, and then the bronchioles. Then they break down into a bronchi, so deeper into the lung, and it gets into this sac called a alveoli. Fun fact about alveoli is the size of an adult lungs, two of them. If you were to spread out in a single layer all the alveoli in your lung, it'd be the size of a tennis court. Okay.
oh,
Wow.
whoa. That's
Crazy, right?
incredible.
The surface area, which is
Wow.
extremely important here when I get to kind of understanding diseases or what smoke does, the surface area is what provides that space to exchange gas, which is the carbon dioxide and the oxygen. So in a normal healthy lung, carbon dioxide goes in out of your breath out through the capillaries, and then oxygen gets brought in and put into your gets connected to the red blood cells inside your lungs and goes to your heart. Okay, so that's healthy. Now the issue with that with smoking in general is that when you bring in smoke, there's these little things called cilia on the insides of your bronchial tubes. And that cilia, what that does is it kind of they're like hair-like structures, and they basically pull pollutants and things out. Um, when that airway gets consecutive smoke over and over again, it starts to literally stick the cilia together. As in,
Mm,
they like when you go try to get that stuff out. That's literally your cilia and the stuck together. And so, number
mm,
one, the function that they're for is starting to eliminate, which is to pull all the pull contaminants out of the air before they get to your lungs to get to put into your blood. Because in theory, if you can break it, if you can bring a substance all the way down through into the alveoli, it will reach your blood supply. Okay. So bronchi, when it gets inflamed, it releases this mucus, which is what's kind of sticking everything together. And so with fun, they're not fun at all, but something that I'm familiar with, my dad and smoked his whole life. I know Nadeem yours does too. All of ours smoke a lot. That morning cough, right? That hacking stuff up in the morning. I always hear my parents hacking up. And so what that is this at night, the cilia actually start to recover. So, okay, so then you hear that and you you try to get it up, but that's basically your mucus trying to come up. Now, after all of that smoke starts to create that area, go down into your alveoli, it starts to do the similar damage. What that does is it eliminates the surface area, so it starts to literally burn up the cells and the space inside your lungs, and that reduces the amount of oxygen and CO2 diffusion that you can have. That's the
Mm.
problem with smoking and people keep gasping for air. It's because they're taking a breath, but the oxygen isn't even able to get into the blood supply. So they have to breathe more, and we have to give higher levels of oxygen. So you asked what COPD was. That's chronic obsessive pulmonary disorder or disease.
Obstructive.
Obstructive. What did I say?
You said obsessive. Sorry.
My bad. It's my
I
that
knew you
obsessive
didn't know.
command. My bad. So what that is it's the inflammation of the bronchioles and it's emphysema. Okay, emphysema
Mm.
is alveoli can no longer diffuse oxygen and CO2 correctly. That's
Wow.
because of years and years of smoke damage. So COPD basically is uncurable. You cannot go back and grow back your alveoli or
Oh
build
man.
that like the whole tennis court that we were talking about. I mean, you're using maybe, a 2 foot square at this point, right?
Wow.
And you can't
Wow.
go rebuild the rest of the tennis court. It just doesn't work that way. So that's kind of the anatomy and of the lungs.
That's
Well,
awesome,
I
man.
mean,
I want to talk a little bit about asthma. That's
yeah,
Yeah.
another
yes,
major lung disease, and that's one that I
and
personally have.
especially with all this, like, the concern of the coronavirus and how it affects the lungs and everything that's going on right now. I know that individuals that have some of these lung diseases, asthma, swelling or inflammation, COPD, lung cancer, so on and so forth, they're more at risk, right? And
Hmm.
please do kind of expand on it a little bit, having dealt with asthma your entire life.
So asthma specifically is inflammation of that bronchial tube that leads into the lungs, and that's why people with asthma start to wheeze. So typically, for me, when I know that I'm starting to have an asthma attack when I can hear my breathing, and it feels constricted, like you're trying to breathe through a straw. And that's one of the things that people are experiencing with coronavirus, this shortness of breath.
Mm.
Now, one of the things that cannabis has been able to demonstrate is that because of its anti-inflammatory effects, it can actually open up that airway. Now, how good is it compared to like an albuterol inhaler? I would say not the same. You definitely don't want to swap out your albuterol inhaler for a cannabis product. Um, but yeah, that's super interesting. And then the other thing that I wanted to cover is bronchitis. And that's
Mm.
swelling and inflammation of the main passageway. Again, the bronchial tubes, typically due to like an infection or something. Um, and then all of these things, if you get enough of that lung or that fluid buildup that Thomas was talking about, it can cause pneumonia. And that's what's happening with coronavirus right now is people are getting this constricted airway. It's causing a lot of inflammation inside the lungs themselves. And all that fluid is building up in the lower part of the lung and it's causing pneumonia. And that's what's, really scary because then you're going to have to be put on a ventilator um, and things like that. So,
You're
yeah.
literally drowning.
Yes.
Yeah,
And what's really crazy is that fluid is our body's a way to fight the infection, and it
yeah.
can and does. I mean, we have colds and things, and those we don't
Mhm.
need antibiotics for some of those, and it works sometimes. But when it goes on overdrive, you're literally drowning yourself, and that's what's weird. And when you talk about the cilia and the open, so when you smoke consecutively, you damage the inside, which causes that bronchitis, right? So with this coronavirus, what you're doing is exposing the tissue to more surface area that the virus can then live on and recreate on. And then that's why it increases your chance of getting or having symptoms or even getting the virus, because it's inevitable that we have small amounts of viruses in our body at all times.
Mhm.
It's just not enough to replicate where our immune system
Right.
can't take over, right? So if we're smoking right now, and we go out and we have, I speak to somebody that has the coronavirus and I'm literally exposed to that, my chances of getting it if I was not smoking are less, period, because the surface area it can defend. The cilia are there to produce to prevent that from coming in, right? So it's really important. The damage that's done from years of smoking cannabis or smoking cigarettes, either way, that's why it increases your chance of getting these viral infections.
Man, and
Right.
and I
So
I read I'm glad you're sharing that. I read an article, I think one of you guys shared it. It was from the director of Normal. saying or suggesting that edibles may be a better choice during the time of this pandemic, specifically for that reason, Thomas.
Agreed.
Yeah, agreed. And it's really tough. I mean, I'll be the first one to say it's like, I've
Yeah.
smoked in the last week, but edibles are going to be a better choice. Now, caveat to that is edibles, guys, they just fuck you up. All right, like
Yeah.
I mean, medicated peanut butter cookies. I'm calling them quarantine cookies.
Oh my gosh.
And make making the dough is really fun, but then you're kind of munching on the dough throughout the process, and like before you even get the cookies in the oven, you're like, fuck,
Oh
and
my gosh. Dude, Caitlin said that when she made the syrup video, she said she did like 4 takes, and she says by the time she was done, she was too messed up, and I was like, "Why'd you use the real syrup?"
That's awesome.
It was awesome.
It is awesome. So
She's
so
kicking ass at those, dude.
she is. I'm excited. We've got some more exciting ones coming our audience's way. Make sure you check those videos out. They're on our Instagram, Know Your Dose Podcast, as well as our Facebook. If you search Bake Bros, you'll see them. Trying to lighten the mood a little bit. But with that being said, just yes, be conscious of your dose and what that is, and do pay attention to the after effects, meaning the following day, right? I enjoyed being ripped on edibles. Don't get me wrong. I love that part. That's my favorite part. But the following day, it totally jacked up my routine. I slept till 7:30. I was just like, brr. I just felt a little bit groggy. That's not typically me. It's and so that's the only difference I would have to say. Getting away from the edibles and back into the lungs. And before we dive really deep into how cannabis affects our lungs, Derek, can you kind of explain the relationship between the endocannabinoid system and the lungs? And before you do, what the endocannabinoid system is for any of our new listeners?
Yeah, so the endocannabinoid system is a modulatory system in the body that helps keep the balance within the body amongst a lot of different systems. So it's tied into your respiratory system through your lungs. It's tied into your cardiovascular system, your nervous system. So I like to think of it as just the intermediary between a lot of the other things. It's the conductor to the orchestra that is, all the systems in your body. So, with that being said, it has two main receptors. It's more complicated than this, but this is typically how people define it. You have your CB1 receptors, which are in your central nervous system, which is your brain and spinal cord typically. And then you have your CB2 receptors, which are in your peripheral nervous system or the nerves outside of your brain and spinal cord. What's interesting about the lungs is that there are actually significantly more CB1 receptors than CB2 receptors, and they're responsible for regulating the recruitment and function of different types of immune cells in your lungs. So, one of the things we talked about that one of the jobs of the lungs is to clear out pathogens, viruses, because, you have coronavirus, I breathe it into my lungs. I have immune cells inside my lungs that are actively trying to, take preventative measures and make sure that that virus doesn't get into the lungs themselves and clear it back out through the cilia. So, um, basically, what happens is once a pathogen comes in, it causes an immune response, inflammation, and that inflammation essentially kills the bug. And your endocannabinoid system is responsible for, activating that inflammation and then reducing that inflammation once the pathogen has been cleared, so to speak. Now, what's super interesting is that when we add THC, CBD, all these other cannabinoids, we start messing with the natural signaling of that immune system. And that can be positive and it can be negative depending on the context. So, one of the things in this industry is that typically people talk about smoking cannabis as if it's the harm to your lungs is negligible because there hasn't been a clear association between cannabis and lung cancer like we see with smoking cigarettes. And if you come into the industry and you're not really into a lot of research, you might make the false assumption that cannabis is, totally fine for your lungs. And that's actually not what we see. Um, One of the most concerning things about, well, let me give you a piece of positivity before I hit you with the negativity. So, when THC enters the lungs or enters the bloodstream and binds to those CB1 receptors in the lungs, it causes this reduction in inflammation. And in studies with mice, they've actually shown that if somebody has pneumonia, you can administer THC and it can actually reduce the inflammation in the lung and help the progression of the disease in a positive way.
Hmm.
Now, the caveat to that is when you administer THC in a chronic way in a mouse or you administer it before the onset of a lung infection, you actually see that the lungs themselves are not able to um, create the immune response that they need to in order to fight the infection. And you see a worse prognosis for the mouse. And actually, it increases the rate of mortality in the mice that consume the THC prior to developing this lung disease. And so, long story short, THC can reduce that inflammatory response, leaving you vulnerable to infections. This is things like the flu, other respiratory infections like COVID-19, as well as bronchitis and pneumonia. So I think there's a case to be made that cannabis consumers should be cautious and not just assume that our cannabis consumption is going to help us out in this situation. And then we can dive more into like what smoking specifically does. I think Thomas did a pretty good job highlighting that. One of the things I think is important though is that, cannabis smoke contains just as many carcinogens as tobacco smoke. And that's something that, a
Mm.
lot of us just don't think about. You can actually deposit 4 times the amount of tar into the lungs from cannabis smoke, particularly just from the way we hold our, inhales. Typically you like to take a nice big inhale and just hold it as long as possible, try to ghost that smoke and then blow it all out. Um, so yeah, there's just some differences. We don't typically use filters like you do with cigarettes. That's another reason why there's more tar. And you find across the board that heavy cannabis use, and I mean, this is a lot of cannabis use, typically people who are consuming like 10 joints a day. Um,
Okay.
but over long periods of time, you see increased incidence of chronic bronchitis, coughing, sputum, and wheezing, and decline in lung function overall. So, yeah.
It's what's really concerning to me is that t- and I am ignorant to the subject, but like there's not much we can do to rejuvenate or heal our lungs. Once the damage is done, it's done. Am I
No,
correct?
that's not
No,
true.
No.
not true. Okay.
At a certain point, when you get to a certain like our age and our immune systems and our body, especially how healthy we attempt to be, we have the ability to recover.
Hmm.
Um, it's when it gets to the point of emphysema.
Okay.
It's chronic years, sometimes decades of smoking that's required. It's really crazy
Okay.
how resilient our lungs are. But then again, it's really not that crazy if you look at it from an evolutionary standpoint. Without your lungs, there is no oxygen. Without oxygen, there is no cell life.
Right.
Um, period.
I
And
mean,
story.
because smoking is not new, guys. I mean, this has been around for, I
Right.
mean, 10,000 years, as some would argue, but it's been around for so long. So to a degree, I mean, we've evolved with smoking, you
Well,
know.
To an extent.
so we have it evolutionary time. There hasn't been enough time of human smoking to like evolve an adaptation to smoking. I think it's more of what Thomas was saying is just your lungs are so important. You think about a cut on your arm, right? That
Mhm.
cut just doesn't stay there for the rest of your life as an open sore. Over time, the cells regenerate and it heals that cut. And so if you stop smoking, yeah, Nadeem can tell you all about that. He just burned the heck out of his arm. Um,
Ugh,
but if you give your lungs a chance to heal themselves, it's the same process. The body naturally wants to go towards healing. If you remove, if I have a big old splinter in my arm and I just leave it there, it's never going to heal. As soon as I remove the splinter, all of a sudden the conditions are such that I can heal. So if you stop
yeah, yeah,
smoking, if you reduce some of that damage, your lungs will repair themselves. Unless you got to the point where, you basically tore off your arm or obliterated your
right.
lung tissue.
No,
Yeah, like
wonderful.
dabs maybe.
So so yes, and which leads into vaping because,
Yes.
to an extent, yes, we have evolved with, smoking, but something we haven't evolved with for a very long not in comparison to smoking is vaping, right? This is relatively new.
Yeah.
I would say vaping cannabis to the extent to where or to how we vape now. I mean, vaping's killed over 50 people and injured over 2,000. So is it really not safe, or what's better? Is dry flower vaping or vape cartridges better, such as like dry flower being like the PAX pins, or the vape cartridges being like the oil cartridges? Is one better than the other?
Well, I think that there's a distinct difference between the 50 people that died from those vapes and other vapes that are available on the market. Just make that distinguish difference.
Yes. So the what do they call it? Evoli or EVALI, this lung infection that was happening from these e-cigarettes. It was probably due to vitamin E acetate being added to the
Mm,
cartridges to um, help the viscosity of the oil. And
Mhm.
I think the thing that's
And
important to
cut
note
it.
there is as a cutting agent. The thing that's important to understand is that's just a pure product of lack of regulation within an industry. You don't hear
Mhm.
about people dying from, some contaminant in beer because beer's regulated. And so if we had proper regulation, this wouldn't have happened. And I think one of the most concerning things from this outbreak is that, you're seeing states and counties ban vaping. And I think that's an ass backwards approach, specifically because no matter which way you slice it, is vaping ideal for the lungs? No. Is it better than smoking? In almost every single case, the answer is yes, except for
Mhm.
if it's contaminated. So
Mm.
then we have to just, create that delineation between vaping dry flower and vaping cartridges. Now,
Right.
I found one study. It was real small sample size. It was done in 12 people who were regular flower smokers of cannabis, and they had them use like a volcano style vaporizer, and they found significant improvements in respiratory function. And I mean, if you think about it, it just makes sense. You're not burning the plant matter. It's not as hot. You're not bringing as many of those particles into your lungs. And so, you're going to have some kind of uptick in respiratory function because you're just not assaulting them in the same way. Um, in terms of vaporizing cartridges and e cigarettes, I mean, we still don't have a lot of data. There was a recent study done on e cigarettes and smoking cigarettes, and it found that e cigarettes were better for your lungs, but they weren't harm free either. They also had higher instances of respiratory disease. And I think at the end of the day, man, like inhaling anything into your lungs is not the best option. But if you are, limit your smoking and, try some of these vaporizer options because they're, undeniably going to be better than hot smoke.
Yeah,
Well,
man.
well,
I think there's a major difference. Not, there is a major difference between the studies that are on e-cigarettes versus some of these new, uh, cartridges from cannabis. Right. I think the nicotine is cut with PG, propylene glycol, and these e-cigs studies that we're looking at. I don't think anybody's actually studied a cannabis cartridge because I can tell you right now, there's no PG in that. Well, not that's not
No,
necessarily true, but I can tell you that we've made and we've consumed cartridges that are strictly only the active ingredient, which is a
mhm.
distillate portion of that.
right, right.
Now, that is different, a different structure than nicotine and propylene glycol. Those two can't be compared to each other, in my opinion.
So one of the things that we have to be cautious about is we when we're looking at data and we're trying to determine whether e-cigarettes are safe for consumption or not, or whether they're, because my argument isn't that one is better, it's that regardless, e-cigarettes are going to be better than smoking. You're correct. We don't have any science on cannabis only vape cartridges. I remember back when I was working at the dispensary, a lot of the cartridges we sold were cut with PG or
Hmm.
VG or coconut oil. And it wasn't
Hmm.
until the last like year and a half maybe that people started to use like distillate and infused terpene sauces to make it so it was
Right.
viscous enough
Right.
in order to smoke. um,
Hmm.
and I would say in that case, you're pretty much dabbing, and yeah, I would
Right.
say that that's probably even better.
Worse. Oh,
Well,
you think it's better for you?
I mean, I don't know. I would
Let
just
me. Let me.
imagine that so
Maybe it's
those oils are what's in cannabis, right? When you're adding PG, VG, MCT oil, that's all foreign stuff, man. And I mean, I know that they put PG, propylene glycol, in like asthma inhalers, but you're not
Mhm.
sucking on an asthma inhaler, 20 times a
Or
day. Like
burning it.
or burning it. So
Right.
that's where I feel like the more
Combusting.
closer to nature you can get, probably the better. Which is why I like dry
Yeah.
herb best.
I guess let me walk you through my thought process on that. It's like I've seen distillate. I mean, I can literally throw put a liter of distillate and turn it upside down when it's at room temperature, and it does not move. It is a solid state of matter,
Right.
right? I've seen nicotine. It is runny. I guess we would say it's viscous. You can run it. To me, if I'm going to put that into my lungs or propylene glycol, it seems that my body would be able to remove those substances a lot easier than it would be able to remove that sticky cannabis distillate. And so that's what I just that's what my thought process is. It's like
Yeah. I
Gotta
Um,
be
mean, it makes
worse,
sense, but when
man.
you're smoking a joint, I mean, you think about the end of a joint, it's all that black sticky tar.
Yep, yep,
I
yep,
mean,
yep,
you're
yep.
you're breathing
Mhm.
all that into your lungs in a smoke form, and then it's condensing
Right.
down to that same stickiness, and
Right,
and
and now you're taking all that joint
and you're
and then
concentrating it.
multiplying it by 10 and then putting it into the size of a single dab. I think it's worse almost. I mean, I mean, we're not here to debate a bunch, but I really feel like that I think that dabs might even be worse than smoking a joint. And I can't support that, but just from doing both of them and
I,
experiencing the withdrawals and the feeling of withdrawal and different things of a concentrate like that, I would almost have to venture to say that it's worse
I think
than a vaporizer from packs, like a dry herb
man,
vaporizer.
and again, lots of variables to that to consider in terms of like solvents and the parts per million per gram and all that. And
Mhm.
I know one factor to consider is, dude, how hot it is. Like I
Yeah.
mean. Yes, the cherry of a joint is like astronomically hot, but dude, when you take that hot dab, or in my case, I have in the past. I don't. I can say I don't dab anymore, but and to each his own. I mean, by all means, because I know that there are individuals out there that need that concentrate, that high level of
Right.
concentrate. I have,
Mhm.
some of my best friends and near dear people need that level of concentrate. But we're also at a point to where they're controlled, metered devices. Like the Puffco, which is a controlled ceramic bowl. It
Mhm.
doesn't overheat. But 4 or 5 years ago, when this stuff came to light in the beginning, dude, it was like red hot titanium nails, and I mean like singeing your lungs. I mean, and it's like you're coughing, you're like, oh, I'm so baked. No,
Hey,
you
so
can't breathe.
so think about this. The tip of a joint is about 900 degrees Celsius or 1,652 degrees Fahrenheit.
Well, that's pretty hot.
That is
Yeah,
super hot.
yeah, but that's the tip of a joint, right? That's not like what you're actually taking in.
That's like the temperature of the sauna, but we're not actually bringing in 186 degrees into our
I'm just
lungs,
saying
right?
that smoke is hot.
I mean, yeah, it is, but I guess yeah, I hear you. I hear you. It's just look that sticky stuff. Even okay, heat. You said in
Okay,
your dose of
okay.
education, heat's huge, right? Heat's the worst part of
Yes.
what does the damage, right? Okay, and how are you going to get when that stuff cools down into your body, which is about 98.6 degrees? How is your body going to remove that? How is it going to do that? It's in the alveoli we've spoken about, right? It's deep. How are you going to get that out?
Man, I don't know, man. I don't have. I would think some type of.
So
I
so
would think. Go ahead.
so the dose of or the heat of the smoke is about 752 degrees Fahrenheit to that upper limit of 1,600. So that smoke from smoking is just there's no question about it in terms of heat specifically. It's going to do more damage because if you're taking a dab the way we should be taking dabs, if you do dab, you let the heat come down to typically, I mean, it's below 400 degrees, right?
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
I know my PAX vaporizer. It ranges between what is it like 300 and 375?
yeah. That's the I think
Okay.
what is
Okay.
it?
It-
360
So
is
so
the
the
vaping point
s-
for THC.
regardless, no matter which way you're vaporizing, the smoke is significantly less hot. Now, the concentration of THC is a separate issue, and
mhm.
that I don't really have any thoughts on other than I think the more concentration, probably the worse, because
Okay, let
you
me
want a
oh,
minimum effective dose, right? Sorry.
Fight,
no, you're
fight,
right. Minimum
fight,
effective dose.
fight.
But let me ask you this: you smoke a joint, you
Yes.
breathe it in,
Uh huh.
and then you breathe it out.
Right.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how bad do you want to cough?
I mean, it depends on the person.
Okay, well,
And
you're gonna
depends
get to
on the
my point
shitty
real quick
weed
here.
too.
What you're
So
saying is, if I smoke a
is
joint and I
when you
take a
take a
dab,
dab,
yeah,
you're coughing like crazy, bro. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
and it's like
yeah,
it hurts.
yeah.
yeah,
What's
and
what's where it is? What's that? What's up
well,
with that, dude?
yeah, and I think that's because, like you said, it's just super concentrated. I mean, you're probably so. I don't want
Okay.
to defend dabs because I'm not a big fan of dabbing in general, um, but I do think in terms of I don't know, man. Actually, yeah, I don't know, I don't know. You're
I
because
don't
you're
know what
right.
it's cost
Dab
from.
definitely messes up your lungs. Like, but I wonder if you made the dab small enough to where it
Right,
was an
maybe it
Right.
actual
didn't.
dose,
Yes.
and I think that's the
Yes.
problem. It's not dosed
The
properly.
exact
Know
same
your
dose as what
dose.
would you be
Know
pulling
your
in from
dose.
the joint.
Right, because like if you take one of
Yeah.
those like we were at a concert, I think, and I gave you guys my vape pen, and you both like coughed like crazy, but you tried to take massive rips off of it. And I was like, and this happens to everybody. It's like, hey,
Yeah.
just like take like a 1 second puff, man. Like that's all you need.
It's a
And
good
again,
point.
it's just dosing.
Yeah,
Okay,
because
guys.
we always
Okay.
do go hard.
All right. Well. Based on this information, do any of you foresee yourself ever like completely stopping smoking? And I'll speak for myself.
No.
Right now, no. I mean, I'm not in. No, I don't have anything that's like holding me back from doing that. But I will continue to be aware of my relationship with cannabis. That's going to be a conversation that is brought up often on this podcast, especially as we lead into Sober October 2020. That'll be really fun. I can't wait to do our podcast during that month.
Hmm.
But so that's my take on it. What about you guys,
Well
Thomas?
said.
No? Yep.
I
Derek,
mean, I couldn't say much different than that. I
right
mean,
on.
never
So
have too much of a relationship,
Yeah,
and it's just, and it's a social thing. The amount of good that I feel when I'm around my friends and we're all laughing and giggling at
yeah.
each other is just not something I'm not willing to sacrifice that, but I will absolutely, like you said, continue to be aware of how much I use, and
I love
reduce it.
that. I love that. What
yeah, I
about you,
think
man?
um so this is a tough one. But as of last week, I stopped smoking. I'm only using edibles, and I'm gonna do that until this coronavirus thing kind of blows over and we're out of the weeds. Because with asthma, I don't want to put my
Hmm.
lungs in a position where they're not able
Yeah,
to operate as functionally as possible, because if I do get that virus and it does attack my respiratory system, I can't afford to lose any more than I already have. I'm going into it with a deficit. It wouldn't make sense to put a, freaking 20-pound plate on my back and try to
yeah,
run uphill at the same
Right.
time.
You could
yeah,
be coming in with like a 65-year-old's lungs,
yeah.
right? Which puts you right into the surviving factor
Category.
of
Right.
that.
And
It's
then one of
I
the
severe.
think.
things is stress is a big risk factor for asthma flare ups. And I've already experienced that even while I've stopped smoking. So I'm just trying to protect them as much as possible. And you know what? There's been some interesting insights from that shift, because edibles, like you were saying, is not the same.
Yeah,
Mm-mm.
no way, man. No way. Well, God, I love this group, man. Just the awareness. But to wrap it up on the subject of the lungs, before we get into our Q&A, which is the second time we've done a Q&A, or third time now. This will be really fun, guys. You mentioned one tip. I think you had said you breezed over it, but it was take smaller inhalations. What are some other tips that the audience, including myself, we can do to kind of uh, reduce the harm of associated with smoking?
Absolutely. So I'm a huge fan of harm reduction. And the first one is take smaller inhalations. The heat and reduced oxygen flow is some of what's doing the damage. So if you just take smaller hits, you're breathing in more of that natural air, which is cooling down that smoke. You're increasing the oxygen, helps reduce some of the harm. Second major thing is don't hold your inhalations. All you're doing by holding
Mhm.
your inhalation is allowing more tar to build up into the lung, more damage to take place. Your lungs are going to absorb like 90% of the THC within the first second or two.
Yeah.
Everything after that, you're doing more harm than good. So inhale, and then immediately exhale. The
Okay.
second thing is avoid dual use. So really, you should try to make vaping your primary method of consumption and save smoking for special occasions. And then the last thing that I would suggest is, take breaks, incorporate edibles, just give your lungs a chance to heal themselves, as we were talking about, from time to time, so that they're, operating as best as possible. So, I don't typically smoke, I typically vaporize. But when I do smoke, it's with my friends. And so I
Nice.
think if more people, took that approach, their lungs would
Yeah.
thank them for it.
Yeah, definitely. I've noticed that when I do incorporate edibles into the routine, I noticeably smoke less. It's
Mhm.
just, I mean, it kicks that appetite. Well, hey, let's dive into the Q&A sesh portion of the podcast. Really excited for this. And just to preface this, if anybody wants to have their questions answered on the show, please go to our Facebook or Instagram, Know Your Dose Podcast. Look for the Q&A sesh post, and you can leave your questions there, and then we will answer them right here. So the first question we have is from Veronica.Alicia, and she asks, are there foods that can create a stronger side effect when combined with cannabis? If so, what foods and what effect? So we've all heard that myth that, well, is it a myth, Derek? We've all
Mangoes.
heard that mangoes, right? That there's something in mangoes, it's an enzyme, blah, 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 and it makes you higher. It increases the euphoria. So what's the deal, man?
That's pretty much been debunked. The theory was that mangoes had a lot of myrcene in them, which is a terpene found in cannabis. Um, but when you actually look at mangoes, like some varieties of mangoes produce a lot of myrcene, others don't produce any myrcene. So I think as a whole, I think that if you're trying to get more high or more of a side effect, is what it sounds like this person is asking. Fatty foods is what's gonna do it because THC binds to fat.
Mhm.
So that's probably a good idea. Or,
Nuts.
yeah, nuts, fish, things with omega-3 is probably a really good
Mhm.
idea, because those help create endocannabinoids in your body, so you're just kinda boosting the overall system. That's kind of it
I've
for
I've
things I think
I've
would help.
I've personally made the mistake in the past from this is a long time ago when I just didn't know, but getting too high and not knowing what to do, and kind of like I'm drunk and I should eat to try and sober up. Nope, doesn't work. It only made it worse, man. Eating a meal only made it worse because like you said, cannabinoids bind to fat, and that just helped with the mobility of it.
I have an idea, and I haven't really ever put it out there. So you guys tell me if you think it's BS or not. But I think you could play with some of the terpenes in other food to try to
Mhm.
enhance the effects of cannabis. So like lemons and oranges have a lot of limonene. So you could use that to help boost the mood properties. You could add black pepper, which has a lot of beta carophylline to help with some
Yeah.
of the CB2 receptor activation. Um, I don't know if people
Yep.
eat lavender. Maybe you could drink lavender tea and pour some baked bros syrup in it to make you
Of
extra
course.
sleepy. So I think
Yeah.
there's actually a lot of ways you could do that.
And
Lemon
and may
basil,
and
lemongrass.
maybe
Mhm.
you could even incorporate, like aromatherapy, like a oil diffuser,
Yeah,
Right.
in
absolutely.
in conjunction with it, like lavender or pinene or whatever it may be. Um,
Yeah. What
okay.
about alcohol? I mean, obviously we don't like to do that, but that crossfaded feeling, it absolutely has been shown that it will, if you consume the two together, that you'll have a significantly higher blood THC level than those that only consume
And and
cannabis.
and 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 I,
Polypharmacology.
Mm,
I will be very adamant about this, that we do not advocate,
no way.
mixing THC syrup or THC and alcohol. I'm just very adamant about that. However, I will say I've had dozens of patients come to us or come to me or at education days and be like, "Oh man, I put this syrup with a Red Bull vodka and da 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 da," and I'm just like, "Oh my god, you are a brave soul." I'm just, I think it's just really funny. Well, this leads into the next question, not so much cannabis related, but more so lifestyle related. From Bliss Extracts, he asks, or they ask, I don't know if it's he or she. Sorry about that. What are some tips for healthy habits for being more organized and clean around work and home? I thought this was a really cool question because I know we're all going to have a little bit of something to say. Thomas, how about you go first, man?
Oh man. So the question really is about cleanliness, or is it
Yeah.
about?
What are some tips for healthy habits for being more organized and clean around work and home?
I mean, go on YouTube and look and see how pneumonia is created and all these little different germs and stuff, and it'll start to get you to want to be more clean. That's for sure. That's a tip.
so, so scare tactic, right? Scare the clean into you.
Yeah, understand how easy it is for cells and stuff to replicate and create disorder, for sure.
What about being more organized in your home and work life? Like, what are some of the things that you do personally to try and maintain that?
Organization.
Yeah.
Sorry, man, it's kind of cutting in and out, so I'm hearing every couple of different words.
Okay. It was what are some of the things that you do to be more organized and clean around work and home? Like, what are just like? Do you have a routine? Do you have tactics? Anything
Oh,
like that?
well, I mean, I guess I took it too far to like cleanliness because of this virus thing. So cleaning and sanitation, my bad. I guess organization. I know one thing is the what my desk looks like is kind of what my mind
Mm,
looks like.
Mhm.
So I like to keep that nice and organized. But I think the biggest thing, and I think we've spoken this about this before, but is bookending my days. Having a morning routine. My morning routine lasts from an hour to an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours every morning before I even talk to people. And so with that, I go through my reading, I go through my meditation, I go through my yoga stretching, I go through finding myself, talking to myself, basically what we're going to do today. And that's the most crucial part for me, is the bookends, because also towards the end of the day, you don't want to just go to bed with all those thoughts going, to kind of decompress those and put them down somewhere else, and meditate again on that is very important for me. And taking all those projects and I guess putting it on a bookshelf, which is very, very difficult to stop thinking about. But that has helped me keep organized throughout my days for sure.
I see your books behind you on this call. Is are those alphabetical order? Derek, what about you, man? What are some things that you do? I mean, I love your perspective on this because you're a father, of two children, you have a wife,
Hmm.
so it may be a little bit more chaotic or different for you. So what are some of the tips and healthy habits for being more organized, clean around home and work?
The first thing I would say is don't sleep on what Thomas said about your space being a reflection of your mind and vice versa. And a lot of the times, if I can change my environment, it will have an effect on my mindset. So
Yeah,
be very conscious of the fact that I might not feel like it's affecting me, but it most likely is. And so one of the things that I like to do is like I don't like to go to bed with a dirty kitchen because I don't want to wake
yeah,
up to a dirty kitchen. I
totally.
don't like to leave the house at the beginning of the day and my bed's not made and all shit's out everywhere,
Mm.
because I want to get home to a place that looks organized and clean. And so it's like um, get ahead of it. Like a recent example was I have an attic and I store a bunch of stuff up there. And for the last year, I just was throwing stuff up there without really paying attention to how it was organized. And then my wife would be like, "Hey, can you go get the Christmas decorations?" And instead of just being like super easy, it was a freaking nightmare. You're like
Every
sifting through
time.
boxes, nothing's organized, there's no labels on anything. And it was just a total shit show. So this weekend, I took everything out of the attic, which if I had just done it right the first time, I wouldn't have had to do this. And I organized everything. I cleared a bunch of shit out. I labeled every bin. I organized it according to season and activity. And from now on, when I take something out, it's going to go right back in its place. It's kind of like what they taught you to do in school. Like take out your work, set it at your desk, do the work, then put it back in its assigned spot. If we just did that in the beginning, and it takes a lot of work up front, but you won't have to do it again. So that's kind
Right.
of my tip. Just get after it, get it organized, and then keep up with it.
Yeah, dude. For myself, it's Nike's "Just Do It" that rings in my mind, and I'll pawn off the dishes in the sink. It's like I don't like going to bed with a sink full of dishes. I also try and find the mindfulness in washing dishes. Right? It's funny because I'll cook for people often at my house, and they're like, "Hey, let me help you. Let me give you a hand," and I'm like, "No, no, 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 it's fine. I got it." Number one because I'm going to clean them better than you. And number two, because I like being mindful of, I like being mindful while I do it and in the process of doing it. And that's just one thing. It could be laundry, right? It could be sweeping the back patio, whatever it is. Like the moment you think about it, do it. Don't don't postpone it. Just do it. If time permits and nothing is at risk, like just do it. Get it done. And those little things like that, like washing the dishes when you think about it, folding the laundry or hanging up your clothes when you think about it, those little tiny things are going to reinforce positive discipline, right?
Yep.
And it becomes easier and easier and easier.
Hey,
That would
dude, just to riff off of what you're saying, listen to this podcast while you're doing it. Give yourself some
Yeah.
entertainment or any
Yeah, I mean
podcast.
that's but preferably this one, not any other podcast. Shut up, Derek. Um, So I hope that was helpful. I hope you got a couple tips from that. Going into our last question of this episode, guys, Luminous Red Dot Lights says, "What's the most daring thing you have ever done?" That's awesome. I would say the most daring thing. Well, oh boy. I've jumped off some pretty big cliffs in the Ozarks, like some 70 to 80 footers that probably wasn't wise. And luckily I lived. So I've done that a few times. I don't particularly have a fear of heights. So sometimes I don't realize what a bad decision that was until I'm in the middle of the air soaring. Um, that's one of the most daring things I've done. I would say, um, committing to this company, to Bake Bros, was a very daring and risky move. There are a lot of risks involved, especially 10 years ago when this all started to really kind of kick off.
Yeah,
But how about you guys? Thomas, what are some of the most daring things you've ever done?
man. I was hoping you're gonna give me a couple more seconds to think about it, but I guess when you say this company, I think it would be that and devoting 3 years to submarine that goes underwater that you can't say anything is pretty damn daring. Um, I don't think I knew that at the time, really, but I look back now, I'm like, whoa, that was really nutty. But at the same time, just as daring is completely changing my career focus from being a medical doctor to a business owner in the cannabis industry, which was even more daring because I was raised pretty religious. All of us were, and so it's really the opposite of what our people around us would really expect or
Yeah.
want from us. So yeah, I'd say those two things are neck and neck with the most daring things I've ever done.
That book, Stealing Fire, there's an excerpt out of it where it talks about one of the most mentally challenging um, positions in all of the military is being in a submarine. And that, it's inexplicable until you experience it. So thank you for that. I love you.
Thanks
Uh,
for supporting us,
What about
I
you, D-Man?
Yeah, so
bubbleheads.
most daring. Dude, similar to you guys, I think jumping into the cannabis industry, similar to Thomas, like I want to be a doctor. So going into an industry like this, a lot of people are like, "Whoa, what are you doing? That's definitely, gonna hold you back later." And I just decided, the future is gonna look a lot different than it does when I'm making this decision. So I'm gonna double down and say people are gonna be accepting of cannabis. Cannabis is gonna prove its worth as a medicine, and we'll be looked at as pioneers rather than rebels. Um, so there's that. The next biggest thing, the most daring thing I've ever done, having a second baby. I think that
Ooh.
was daring because me and my wife had our first kid at 19, and it has not been easy. Um, but we made a decision that we didn't want our daughter to grow up as an only child. We wanted her to have a sibling, and we wanted to experience having a baby where things were planned and we had the means to bring this kid into the world prepared, as opposed to the first one where it's kind of like we're building the cart as we're moving along. And you know what? I am so grateful that I did that, because every day I wake up and that baby's looking at me from the crib, smiling, just like, Dad. It like fills your heart with joy that I can't even put into words. So yeah, that's mine.
Wow.
That's beautiful.
Awesome.
I'll wait.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah. More power to you, brother. Love you. Well, guys, this has been an awesome episode covering the lungs, covering cannabis and smoking. We hope it was very insightful and valuable to you all. We've got some links in the show notes that if you want to get access the dose of education on cannabis and the lungs directly. Everybody, it really, really helps if you leave a rating and review. You can always do that on Apple Podcasts. It really helps with the algorithm gods. And again, if you want some questions and answers, please go to the Know Your Dose podcast on Instagram and look for the Q&A sesh and leave your questions below. Guys, love you. Had an awesome time. Have a wonderful day. Bye. Hey, everybody. Quick disclaimer. The Know Your Dose podcast is for entertainment and informational purposes only. Let's be real. None of us are doctors. Our content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical or public health advice. Please be smart and always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare professional with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Seriously, never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you heard on this podcast. That would just be insane.